reason why companies do M&A into three areas. Okay, one is you're buying growth opportunities, and if your company has hit the end already, you might want to reinvent yourself by buying companies that could augment your existing technology. Okay. You can do a synergy theory where 2 plus 2 is not equal to 4, but maybe more than that, because you can do things together better, either increase revenue or decrease costs and so on. So synergy is probably one of the most important reasons why companies acquire each other. And then lastly, we had a market power theory, which we talked about. They have two companies competing in the same space, but now we consolidate. So we don't need to compete anymore. We can increase our market power. So the framework for analyzing synergies, typically is split into 3 components. And if you want to summarize this, either it's in growth, improving in growth of revenue, cutting costs, or improving asset utilization. So you have this lecture notes, so you can go and read this in your own time. I want to point you to this picture which we saw together earlier in this course. It's our ROIC tree. Okay, so the same framework that we had a look at earlier for any company basis, you can use the same logic to analyze M&A for their rationale as well. So you can do either the improvements in your P&L by increasing your profitability, or the improvement in your balance sheet where you want to be more efficient in how you deploy your resources in the company. So you can link back to whatever you had earlier to see this. All right. When you do an M&A, typically many companies are serial acquirers, in the sense that when you buy one company, you don't stop there. Okay? You keep buying companies to add on to your portfolio. Big tech companies have been known to be like that in the past, but you also have companies like in Thailand, IVL, that grew by acquiring other people, not just by themselves as well. So you can. So here's a map by Bain & Company that talk about companies that do serial M&A, what kind of roadmap you need to have in your organization to prepare yourself for success. And a lot of it is not just about learning what the new company can do for you, but it's also about integrating, successfully integrating the new business you acquired into your own existing empire. Because most of the M&As that fail, they not really fail because of the execution, but most of the time it fails because of the consolidating the 2 companies as one hasn't really happened at the pace that the original acquirer envisioned that to be. I want to focus more though on the numbers in this case, because in your case you're going to have to do this valuation yourself. In terms of valuing M&A, we can understand this through this graph over here. So when you're buying 2 companies, when you buy a company, you don't really need to look at your existing company, because everything that matters about this deal is going to be at the target. When you buy a company, imagine this as a value of your target, as is the blue line here, the blue bar here. When you acquire a company, there are 2 main effects at hand. The first effect is the synergy, the value you're creating. And the second effect that people often ignore is that when you acquire a company, if you acquire using debt, you're going to have the tax shield effect of acquisition. And a lot of times when companies put forward their investment thesis of why acquiring company X and Y and so on, sometimes if you don't separate out the source of value creation separately, you just do the valuation of the target under the new capital structure, you would get the value of the target with the tax shield. So this is given free, right? Because you're just increasing the value of the firm, not by anything you're bringing to the table, but just changing the target firm to re-lever. So a lot of times when companies are engaged in M&A negotiations, if it's a hostile negotiation, the target sometimes ends up recapitalizing themselves, borrowing money to increase value. Because one of the arguments sometimes that the acquirer makes to the board, the target, is that, look, I'm buying you at a higher price, so shouldn't you be happy? So as a defense mechanism, targets sometimes lever up the company. And we know when the company levers up, the value increases by the tax shield amount. So as a way to appease current shareholders, target companies change their capital structure so that the stock price increase, and then use that in an argument in shareholder meeting, say, look, we can do this for you without relying on outside help, so don't sell to that guy, right? So the recapitalization is often used as a way to defend against takeovers. But this part, though, is a more important part when you acquire a company, because this part is a part where if you don't combine the two companies together, you won't have access to this benefit. And these are the things that we saw in the charts earlier of what can be done. For example, increasing top line by selling more, economies of scope. Okay? Reducing the cost by eliminating overheads or better utilization of existing resources, or even releasing the tied up capital in the business so that the company doesn't need to have as much capital combined, more efficient in terms of a balance sheet usage. And we can value this. So when we value a company in an M&A transaction, we just look at the target firm. We start by the valuation of the firm as it is. Then we can re-lever the firm to the new capital structure to get the next benchmark. And then add a few assumptions about the sources of synergies in the firm. And the synergies can come either as a one-time payment. So if you have a working capital management program, often it's about unlocking the cash tied up in the company. So that's going to be a one-time release of cash. And you can also have recurring programs, for example, cutting costs. You're reducing workforce by 10%, 20%, so you're going to have a lower cost going forward in the future. So we're going to see the model that we do together, all you need to do for M&A valuation is to value the existing company and add a couple of lines to reflect the synergy. And that's it, you're done. This will give you the value of the company under your control or as combined as a group. The next process is then just to determine then what is the price I should buy the company at. So if this value is at say 1 billion, okay, and then you add all the synergies and benefits together, it comes out to about 1.2 billion. That's your maximum limit to how much you should pay for this company. So to add value for your shareholders, all that remains is to offer a price lower than 1.2 billion. Because if you can buy something worth 1.2 billion at a price of 1.1 billion, the difference of 100 million is the NPV that goes to your existing shareholders. So in terms of valuation model, this is pretty much the structure of how you're going to do it. I'm going to show you the structure later on in this class, but in terms of conceptual ideas of what we're doing, this is it. But let me talk a little bit about the research. Okay, if you're interested in doing M&A research, what is a challenge? One of the ways we measure value creation in M&A is to look at the stock price reaction upon announcement of M&A. And then if we see that after announcing stock price goes up, we tend to conclude then it's a beneficial arrangement to do so. Now, the challenge between doing that is that if you look at the stock price, of the acquirer, when you are analyzing the returns, what you are getting is two things. Okay? You're getting the synergy, and you're also getting the result of a negotiated outcome. Back to the example I said earlier, this company is worth 1.1 billion. Sorry, with synergy is worth 1.2 billion. So if I can acquire it for 1.1 billion, then theoretically, I add value of 100 million to my existing shareholders. So let me draw this out so maybe we can visualize this together. Okay, so we have target and we have synergy. Say this is 1 billion, this is 200 million. So that's the output of our valuation model. And we said that maybe we acquired at some price of 1.1 billion. But if you look at the announcement returns of the acquirer, what we're looking at is this. Here's the acquirer, and if the return is positive, we're reflecting this component, right? The value added to the acquirer, not exactly the synergy of the whole deal. Because the synergy is like a cake that both of us have access to, but then the deal, the price that we pay is the result of negotiated outcome. We're cutting the cake together. The synergy is worth 200 million, but we're cutting the cake at 100 each. So when we look at the announcement return of the acquirer, we're not going to get the full 200. We're only going to get the part that belongs to the acquirer. So that's a challenge when you're doing a research on M&A, because if you look at the acquired returns only, it's half the picture. Because of this, okay, research in M&A often looks at the announcement returns of both the target and the acquirer. Then you get both sides of the puzzle. Then you can deduce, is this announcement, is this deal a net benefit, okay, to you, or a net cost to you? So point number one, right? Target abnormal return is insufficient. You look at acquirer. Also matters. That's a pure synergy, okay, where both of you together you're doing well. Sometimes your synergy may come at a cost of stealing market share away from existing rivals. So another interesting way of looking at the effect of M&A is to not look at your own abnormal returns, but look at your competitors' abnormal returns. So when Amazon decided it's going to acquire Whole Foods, it turns out other supermarkets stocks on that day went down. Amazon did similar thing with a pharmaceutical company, a drugstore, the dispensary. Amazon wants to sell drugs too. The stock with the abnormal returns of the pharmaceutical companies who are competitors also went down. So you can look at competitors too. You try to read this. So when you look at target abnormal return is insufficient, you should look at acquirer normal return too. So that's what I want to get at, because if you look at acquirer, it's only one piece of the puzzle. You should look at both companies to get the full picture of value creation. So competitor returns also matter, especially okay when you look at M&A, where you're looking at the market power theory of M&A. If your benefit of your M&A is coming from exercising greater market power, you should see a reflection in your competitors' abnormal returns too. So if you're doing research based on this topic, you shouldn't look at just the target or the acquirer. You should look at both, and if possible, you should also identify competitors and see what happens there as well. This can go in multiple directions, right? Sometimes you can have a vertical integration. You're integrating into your supplier. So there's also a paper that look at what happens when a company downstream acquires a company upstream. And they look at companies who used to be suppliers. So let me draw a picture, right? We have company A downstream, and we have company B, B2, B3, and so on. These are your suppliers. So company A acquires company B, they are part of each other. B3 and B2 used to be supplier of company A. Now that A acquires B1, B2 and B3 probably can't become suppliers anymore. So the stock returns of B2 and B3 also went down upon announcement. So these are ways for you to create ideas, right? When you want to write research papers, to look at the effect of M&A. Because sometimes you have collateral damages of your transaction on other people, and this provides a good empirical test bed for ideas about what happens to M&A transactions. Okay, whether it's M or A depends on when you want to classify, is it friendly or hostile? So friendly is usually merger, hostile is takeover. Sometimes a hostile bidder, we call them a raider. They come in and raid a company. Because there are sometimes cases where you come and acquire a company and then you do bad things to the company for your benefit as well. So you can read examples of, for example, the takeover of RJR Nabisco by KKR. KKR is a private equity company. And I think maybe not next time, the time after, we're going to talk about private equity. I think next time we'll talk about private equity together, and we'll hear a little more about what are the typical strategies of private equity companies and what do they invest in. We call these guys financial buyers because they buy the companies not because they want to integrate into their existing operation, but they want to buy it because they just want financial returns out of it. Typically, when you have companies being bought, it invites in competition. And competition can be rivals, can be suppliers, can be customers, or someone totally unrelated like this. And then you can see the interaction and how that affects value. We're going to learn more about this. There's a movie on this, right? Barbarians at the Gate, which is pretty much about this deal, RJR Nabisco being taken over by KKR. Holberg, Kravitz, and Roberts, something, I think. Okay, now, we said earlier M&A is about a change in control. So, if you are running the company whose target, when someone comes in to buy the company, take over the company, usually it spells bad news for you. Chances are you're going to be fired and ousted as a leader. So what are ways for you to defend against takeovers? Okay. Here are some common strategies for takeover defense. Number one is poison pill. There's a story, there's a story about the nurses, I think not nurses, the nuns in Germany. Okay, they were being raided by barbarians, and the barbarians basically wanted to, they raided the monastery, nunneries, because they just want to, get those nuns. So the head nun said, "You're gonna come and get us? Fine." You know what they did? They cut off their ears, cut off their nose, so they mutilated themselves, so that the barbarians don't want them anymore. This is what a poison pill defense is. You're gonna come and take over my company, right? I'm gonna do things so bad to the company, you don't want my company anymore. Sounds very bad, but you save yourself as management. So, it sounds bad to your shareholders, right? If you are the company management, this is good news for you, because otherwise, if they successfully raid the company, you're gone. So poison pill defense sometimes work like this. And in fact, if companies have poison pill defense like this, in terms of corporate governance, we don't call these companies with good governance, because these act as an entrenchment mechanism for CEOs. In fact, a company with good corporate governance tends to be companies where you can fire the CEO very easily. Because typically we believe that if CEOs are hard to fire, then they may take actions that are in the bad interest of shareholders, and it's difficult to get rid of them. So that's the poison pill defense. Okay, and in terms of how it works though, it's not as bad as I made it sound. Okay, poison pill defense works like this: if somebody acquires shares in a company, I can have a clause in a company, okay, that says, I am going to trigger an automatic dilution of the company, right? So if you acquire up to 10% of the company, this clause activates where existing shareholders who weren't shareholders before maybe 6 months ago are now eligible to a split. Everyone used to have 1 share, now everyone have 2 shares. If you come in recently, you're not eligible for this. So I just bought 10% of the company, but poison pill gets activated, my 10% becomes 5%, because everyone else shares double in terms of numbers, but my share still stays the same. Right? So that's how poison pill actually looks like in real life. So not as bad as the nuns, but it's still bad for the people who come in and raid the company, because they get diluted. That used to be popular in the past. Nowadays, people don't have it anymore because it sounds like, it's really a bad signal if you have this in the company, because it means existing shareholders, existing management are really entrenched. They don't want discipline of outsiders. Staggered board means when you re-elect board members, instead of having all board members up for re-election at once, you stagger them. Now the importance of this is that if you acquire a company, you get the right to elect people to your board. So if everyone is up for board re-election at once, you may be able to influence the process so that you elect friendly members to the board. But why do board members matter? Because board members are the ones who say yes or no to acquisitions. So if you have staggered board, it ends up being more difficult to take over by outsiders. A white knight, just like white knight in fairy tale, right? When you have fairy tale, you talk about white knight, these guys are people who come to rescue. White knight in finance, though, is not as glamorous as the fairy tale. Because white knight means you're gonna take me over, right? I don't like you, so I'm gonna ask somebody else to take me over instead. I'd rather be taken over by a white knight than by you. So you still end up being taken over anyway, just not by this guy. Right? So that's another defense against the current people who are taking you over. Golden parachute is a clause in management contract that says in the event of firing, okay, the cost for you to fire me is going to be so damn large that if you fire me, it's like I'm jumping off the plane with a golden parachute. I don't have to work ever again. So if you fire me, it costs me $50 million. Just like when you have footballers with really high buyout clause, they're there just to deter other people to buy them. In other words, you just make CEO very expensive to get rid of. So people don't want to buy the company, because if they buy the company, it's still the same guy in charge. So why the hell should I buy the company? Again, another bad sign, okay, of corporate governance. So there's a group of guys called Gompers. So these are three guys, Gompers, Ishii, and Metric. These are the three guys that look at these clauses inside the company, and then they'll come up with an index of collection of all these clauses, and then determine, is this company run in a way that has good corporate governance or not? Right? If a company is easy to take over, then the company and chances are the company is going to be run in a way that is in the best interest of shareholders. On the other hand, if the management is very entrenched, then chances are the companies are not going to be very run in a very well good CG way. So I'll skip the rest, okay, you can read them out later, but I think these are the more important points. And this is what determines the most widely used, okay, CG index, CG score, sorry, corporate governance score. They're mostly based on these conditions about the company. Okay, so in the interest of time, I think I'm gonna leave you to read about these papers yourself. I kind of categorized them already, okay, about the company. So let me just give you a brief background. Actually, in the past, M&A used to be thought of as good in the 80s research, but more recent evidence, M&A tend to find negative outcomes for existing shareholders. You can guess on the title of the paper, right? Wealth destruction on a massive scale, study of acquiring firm return in recent merger waves. So the wisdom, whether M&A has been good or bad, changes over time, primarily because reasons for M&A change, the type of people who do M&A change, and also the conditions of the firms to do M&A change. So, sometimes market conditions drive M&A. Sometimes CEO confidence drive M&A. Sometimes the corporate governance of the firms drive M&A. So here are some selected papers which I think are quite interesting that you can read, pursue more later. You guys like hedge funds, I guess. This is one of the more interesting ones that I found recently. Activism mergers. Okay, so Sometimes you're a hedge fund manager, you buy stocks in a company and you influence the direction of how the company is run. And that may involve suggesting that companies do M&As. So what they found was that the ones that are being driven by these suggestions tend to perform better. And so if you have time, if you want to look at how hedge fund managers are involved with companies and that M&A, I suggest you look at, if you have Netflix subscription, you watch the series called Dirty Money. Okay, and it's an episode on a drug company called Valiant Capital. So Valiant, just Valiant, a drug company. I think it's episode 4 or something, I'm not sure. Okay, but if you do have subscription Netflix, I highly suggest you watch the series on Dirty Money. It's quite well done. And if you're interested in issues about IPO and also the how it can be bypassed. Okay, one of the things we didn't talk about IPOs, and most of the times when you want an IPO, you need to have a good track record. Otherwise, the market doesn't let you in. But you can skip that. Do you know how people skip the good track record? Ever heard of backdoor listing? Okay, so backdoor listing allows you to skip all the steps that the SEC has for you to make sure your company is good. Because if you can just acquire an existing company in the market and then reorganize yourself so that you end up being that company, and then change your index to somewhere else. Suppose I can buy a fashion company that doesn't do very well, and then in the end I'm actually a bank. So I can buy a fashion company and then relist my more to financial services instead. Now, these examples may be extreme because banking is subject to heavy regulations, but you can imagine, okay, you buy some unrelated company, change the name, and then relist in another sector instead, and then you become a listed company. This is called a reverse merger, right? Because it's a reverse direction. You go back into the market. Reverse merger, which is basically an alternative to IPO. If you want to see how prevalent this is, okay, again, Netflix. Netflix has everything. And watch the documentary called China Hustle. This is the experience of reverse mergers by Chinese company in US stock exchange. So it's quite difficult for companies to list in US stock exchange, but not if you acquire already existing companies and get a backdoor listing status in that way. It started in the late 2008 after financial crisis, okay? But now reverse merger, reverse listing is really popular for Chinese companies. They used to go to US to do this. Now they do reverse merger even in Chinese stock markets. So we have like dormant Chinese companies in stock market that aren't doing very well, and we have private companies in China acquiring those listed companies and go on backdoor list. Some interesting research coming out in this field as well. So another series, not series, okay, it's just a documentary I suggest you look at. Now that while we're on Netflix, let me suggest you one more thing too, okay? Betting on zero is an example of a hedge fund short. If you're a hedge fund shorting stocks, what might you do? Yeah, betting on zero is about a company which I think most of you guys could be familiar with, Herbalife. Yeah, about a hedge fund manager who doesn't believe in Herbalife business model and tries to basically drive it down to the ground. And he wants to do that, of course, because he's shorting the stock. So this is by hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, Pershing Square Capital, on his quest to battle against this. But of course, and then along the way, he also faces opposition from another hedge fund investor, Carl Icahn, who wants to squeeze the short. So you can watch more about that over here. And when you're done with all that, and you have about 24 hours to spare, you can watch another series called Billions. also on Netflix. This one is a lot less realistic, but the details in there are pretty good. You can do this after you're done with this course. Okay, now in the time that we have left, I think we're going to be able to go through one spreadsheet together, and the other spreadsheet I'll give to you because I think it's self-explanatory. So I'm going to spend maybe less time on this, but more time on the one Saw Khon-Kaen again. I'm going to show you different ways of valuing a company and how using different valuation methods for the same company actually ends up delivering different valuation and why it delivers different valuation. Okay, so you can open the file Saw Khon-Kaen valuation worksheet I sent you to my group. We're going to go through that together. Then I'll walk you through how the M&A valuation is can be modified from our existing model over here. Okay, now I can have both hands while I use. All right, so this is the last sheet where we're going to be going over a few valuation methods here, right? WACC, APV, and so on. So on this sheet, I pulled forward the cost of capital and so on already from the sheets earlier. I want to point out a few areas where you may disagree with my assumptions, and you're right to do so, right? I use risk-free rate of 30 years and also cost of debt of 1 year. Short-term debt and a very long-term risk-free rate. Now you may want to disagree with this and choose 10-year risk-free rate instead. That's fine. Okay, the main point of this exercise is not to discuss if I change discount rate, what happens. I want to show you different methods. So you can go back and adjust this assumption in your own convenience if you want. I'm just going to go and proceed with this sheet instead. So right now, based on information that we have about the company, okay, the current equity beta is pretty low, and the company debt to value ratio is about 21%. We're going to see a simple example first of if we want to change capital structure from 21% debt to 15% debt, what would happen to our cost of capital and so on, right? We're going to start with this assumption first. So we have equity beta 0.3354. We can use the Hamada equation to get the unlevered beta, the exercise you're now very familiar with. We need to have the debt to equity ratio first. So we have the debt to value ratio here. I'm going to convert that to debt to equity ratio by dividing dividing the debt to value ratio with 1 minus debt to value ratio. Right, so let me note this down. DV ratio to DE ratio by DV divided by 1 minus DV will give us our desired DE ratio. Okay, let's do this. DV divided by 1 minus DV gives us our debt to equity ratio, which is slightly higher. Do the same thing here as well. Right, so first step, we're going to unlever the equity beta. So we have the levered equity beta here. We want to divide this by 1 plus DE ratio multiplied by 1 minus effective tax rate. Oops. So our unlevered beta is lower than the levered beta. Of course, I'm going to carry this over to the recalculation. So on the right-hand side, what we're doing is we're going to recalculate our cost of capital if we change our target capital structure. So once I successfully unlever my beta in this line here, I'm going to take the unlevered beta, which is the same in any case of our leverage. I'm going to lever it up so that we're going to have an equity beta that reflects a lower use of debt. And we can guess if our levered beta at 21% DB ratio was 0.3354, our levered beta at a lower leverage ratio is going to be less than 0.3354. So the unlevered beta multiplied by 1 plus a DE ratio multiplied by 1 minus the effective tax rate gives us, okay, the levered equity beta, which is of course lower because we use less leverage. And with this, okay, the cost of equity has been automatically calculated and also WACC automatically calculated. So we used to have WACC of about 5.78, now we use a bit less debt, our cost of capital goes up a little bit, reflecting the change in the value of tax shield that we have. So at this point, I think everything that we have here is still standard, right? So let's use the WACC that we have to value the company. So we have our free cash flows and so on going forward. And we can project the cash flow out so that we have the last year free cash flows and so on. So I'm going to assume the growth rate is 3.5% for Thailand and project the free cash flow out one more year from here. So last year 2017 multiplied by 1 plus the growth rate. Now let me delete this and try this again. Equals last cell multiplied by 1 plus. Now I don't need to go back to the input anymore. I can type in G because I named the cell G. You can name cells by going to the cell and up here, right? Typically you see cell reference. You can type in a name that you want and this cell will be given that name. So if I highlight this cell and I name this G, anytime I type in G to my model, it will refer automatically back to the cell B16. Handy shortcut, okay, if you're working with spreadsheets like this all the time. I presume some of you have done this already before too. And now that I show you how to do this, if you go back to this cell C15, here we call this cell WACC. So anytime I type in the word WACC, it will be the value in cell C15 too. So I can do the terminal value calculation by taking this divide by WACC minus G. I don't need to do any scrolling up and down anymore. I save time in doing that. So we have the terminal value. Okay. So next I'm going to add the free cash flow to terminal value together because I'm going to be lazy and use the NPV function and calculate the value here. So I use the NPV function discounted at WACC, add in all these values. But since the units, the original units in the spreadsheet was thousands, pretty weird. So I'm going to rescale this into millions. I'm going to divide this by 1,000 more. So I have the enterprise value by taking the value of cash flows earlier, and then I think I don't need to include the first year because first year 2014 by the end, or maybe it's in 2013, sorry, so we can take all these cash flows. Okay. All right, so we have enterprise value minus debt, we have equity value divided by number of shares outstanding, get value per share, and so on, and we're done. For some reason the value is pretty low. I wonder why that is. Okay, at least based on the numbers we're doing, this seems to be the right output. Okay. So, based on this, we can do a little backward calculation. Oh, I think, sorry, let me fix the cells a little bit. I think I know what I'm supposed to do with this. What I wanted to do was to project it out to 2018 and then get cash flow for 2019 as well before I get the terminal value here. So this would be, actually, no, we can leave it this, it's fine. Sorry. All right. So if we do backward calculation, suppose we at 2017, what will be our firm value? It will be this. Okay, it will be whatever we got as our enterprise value, as our terminal value at the end. This will be our firm value. So what I want to do here is a little recursive calculation. I'm going to roll back the calculation so that this enterprise value will be equal to 1.4 million by the time we reach 2014. So the way I'm going to do this is to take last year's value, add the cash flow I'm going to get in that year, and then I'm going to discount this at WACC. Let me zoom in a little further. Okay, so this is last year's enterprise value plus the cash flow we got last year. Because if we look at the exercise, what we're doing here is, if we got, at time t, we have our EV here, we have our free cash flow. The value at time t of EV is based on all future free cash flows in the future. So if we want to track at t minus 1, our EV at t minus 1 is going to be based on this number and this number discounted. Okay, so I'm adding the final enterprise value to the cash flow we get last year and then discount it to get the enterprise value at t minus 1, and so on. And if I keep doing this calculation, some reason I don't get the same number. Let me see. Okay, now I know why I don't get the same numbers. Okay, this is better. I was including the cash flow at 2014 as well, so my evaluation was as of 2013. I didn't really have a t equals 0. So let me change a little bit, sorry about that. Let me change a little bit and then look at the cash flow from 2015 onward only. So that 2014 is t equals 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Okay, so our t. So that means when we do our valuation, we have to ignore this cash flow. This cash flow will be immaterial. Just delete it, it doesn't really matter. Look at these cash flows onward only. So now this number matches this number. Our enterprise value of 1.5 billion here, if you want to look at what our value is going to be 1 year from now, 2 years from now, we have all these numbers in the following stages. Yeah, this recursive calculation allows us to roll back what the path of our enterprise value is. And the important thing why I want to do this is that if we assume that we're using this WACC every year, then what we are assuming about a company debt usage is that our debt to value ratio better be 15% every year. So that means we need to have more and more debt as our firm increases in value. So let me apply this to the debt to value ratio that we had earlier. What this implies is that, well, this year I'm going to have debt of 22.27, 222 million. I have more debt than that this year. This year I'm going to have 230 million in debt, and by the time I get to 2017, I'm going to have 247 million in debt. If your debt behavior follows this pattern, then using WACC to value your firm is the accurate way of doing so. So in short, when you ever use WACC, assume constant DV ratio throughout your forecasting window, and in fact forever. As your firm grows, you need to have more and more debt as your firm grows. I'm a little curious why how come my numbers are a little on the small side. Oops. Okay.
Ajahn, can you show the formula in B41 again?
B41, yeah, it's debt to value ratio multiplied by the enterprise value that we have. Okay, implied debt, DB multiplied by DB gives us this. Okay. I'm going to give you the spreadsheet, but let me fix the calculation a little bit here so that the numbers down that we have are all consistent. I want to extend the forecasting window by 1 more year. Put our numbers down here to match. Okay. So this is the WACC method where if you want to look at this graphically, we're assuming okay, our company has free cash flow, and once we discount it using WACC, we get the full enterprise value. That's the WACC method. Another method is called adjusted present value, where we use the same free cash flow, okay, exactly the same free cash flow as before, but we discount the free cash flow using not WACC, but unlevered cost of equity. Okay, using unlevered cost of equity, and we're going to get some different numbers down here. In our spreadsheet, which we didn't get to go through together in class, okay, I made some forecasts going forward in the future about how the company is going to have debt, and we found out that our company have a lot of cash that we generate, so we'll be using that cash to pay down our debt. So this number comes from the actual pro forma financial statements of Stock Organic. It turns out we're going to have less and less debt in each year as we pay down the debt. So if this is our true behavior, we're paying down debt over the year, then the way we value the tax shield, it's not going to be the same, because earlier we used the same debt to value ratio, so we have more and more debt. The way we value our tax shield has an implicit assumption that we're going to use more and more debt every year. If in reality our debt goes down, what can we do? Well, we can make an assumption about the path of debt going forward. If our debt goes down in each year, then the interest expense is also going to go down in each year. If the interest expense goes down in each year, then our interest tax shield is also going to go down in each year. So this is the interest expense multiplied by the tax rate. Where's the tax? If you took my spreadsheet and you don't have the recursive calculation enabled, I suggest you go to Files, Options, and then Formulas, and then enable iterative calculation, because the earlier pro forma financial statements require some iterative calculations to complete. So once you enable that, we are now able to calculate the interest tax shield, which is simply interest expense multiplied by the tax rate. So here is our interest expense, interest tax shield, sorry. is your cost of debt multiplied by amount of debt multiplied by the tax rate. And we're going to value this as well using the cost of debt. All right. So we have interest tax shield in each year. Now we're ready to do some assumptions about how our debt is going to go on forward from here. We don't really have any assumptions about how our debt is going to carry on forward from here. So one assumption we can make is assume that it's going to be the same amount forever, say. Okay, so let's assume constant perpetual debt. So in this case, our debt value, the present value tax shield from here onward is simply going to be the amount of debt we have outstanding multiplied by the tax rate, right? As we proved together in class before. Something is not right here either. Okay. So I'm going to add the two together and then discount the cash flows at different rates. So the value of the levered firm NPV as before, we're not going to value at WACC, we're going to value at unlevered cost of equity, RU, like we said over here. Then we're going to value the tax shield using RD, cost of debt. When we draw the picture, we're going to have two components of the firm. The value of the firm where it's unlevered, and the value of the firm where the present value of the debt tax shield. And that's 1.38 billion and also about 43 million. Added together, enterprise value combined is about 1.422 billion. Compared to what we had earlier, okay, our enterprise value was 1481.79. Here, our enterprise value is 1422.13. This is called the WACC method because we use WACC. This is called the adjusted present value method, APV. And we get slightly different valuation. And WACC has higher value, not surprisingly, because when we use WACC, we're actually using a very different kind of leverage. In fact, we're using more leverage than we're actually using. If we look at the table, our leverage usage grows over time, whereas over here, our leverage usage drops over time. So that's the first mismatch that we have in this valuation. So you can do a very similar thing before, right? The value in unlevered firm and then roll back the calculation. So let me do this quickly. I'll give you the spreadsheet to explore at your own time. You can do value unlevered firm 2008. It's just the present, just a value, terminal value itself. And in 2017 will be last value plus the cash flow divided by 1 plus RU. When we do the backward calculation, roll back, we're going to see that this value is exactly the same as this value before. And also roll back the tax shield calculation. And we're going to get exactly the same value of tax shield again. So we can add the enterprise value together. This is our enterprise value in each year. We also have the debt outstanding from our forecast earlier. So we calculate what the implied debt to value ratio we have in each year is. And it turns out our debt to value ratio declines over time based on this much debt that we're using. So the next part, the automatic calculation that's been done in the sheet. Let's see. So if you have this much debt in reality, and this is your enterprise value in reality based on this pattern, then our debt to value ratio declines over time. So does our debt to equity ratio. So based on this debt to equity ratio, you can lever up the beta according to this, and then get the cost of equity, and then you can get the WACC for that year. So you can actually reconcile the two methods by pointing out to the fact that when you use WACC calculation, you're assuming a constant WACC every year. You don't have to make that assumption. There's no reason why your cost of capital is the same every year. If you use different leverage, then your WACC changes every year, that's for sure. So if we change WACC every year, just like this, we want to see that if we change WACC every year, what does that do to our valuation based on this modified assumption? So I think that's some of the mismatch here where I didn't extend the analysis out far enough. So let me extend the analysis out. So that we have the years up to 2018. Now we have WACC for every year. So if we apply our WACC correctly, we can, now we have different discount rate every year. So the only way for us to do this is to create our discount factor manually. So discount factor for the first year is going to be 1 divided by 1 plus this WACC. Okay. The discount factor next year is going to be the original discount factor for 1 year multiplied by 1 divided by 1 plus WACC in the next year. So we're changing the discount rate in each year. Each year has different discount rate. Then we can do the analysis again. Now we have varying WACC in each year. And hopefully, our valuation is going to be closer. So based on this compromise, we get a valuation of 1465.66. So compared to the actual APV, it's a bit closer, but not really there yet. So that's one way to show that there are ways for you to make this adjustment and get closer. But it doesn't get you all the way there. Have I lost you guys? So far? Now, if you ignore what I wanted to do comparing those two methods, at least let me point out to you the differences between two methods. We know using these two methods carry different assumptions. So you get different valuation. So don't be surprised when people come to you with different valuation methods and get different value, because different methods have different valuation, different methods have different assumptions. And those differing assumptions are the key reason why your valuation are not the same. So why is it that we need to have two different methods over here? Because WACC is very simple, very easy to see. So people use it a lot. But WACC comes with a very heavy penalty, because WACC assumes you behave in a very particular way. You have to use this leverage forever. If you're willing to make this assumption, WACC is fine. But in most other cases, especially when you have, say, an M&A deal where you just recently borrow a lot of money to buy the company, and when you do that, typically lenders don't let you keep that amount of leverage all the time. You have to pay your debt down. So your actual, instead of having constant DB, sometimes when you undergo a buyout, M&A like this, your debt is actually going down over time. If your debt is going down over time, using WACC gives you a very different answer. So the adjusted present value is more suited for situations where you leverage changes significantly over time. And this is going to be particularly useful when you look at exercises for deals where you use a lot of debt, and these are typically called LBOs, leverage buyout, and we're going to be looking at that case, Toya us together. So we want to have a way that value our investments under environments where we use a lot of debt and debt is not permanent. But for normal corporate finance cases, for normal valuation cases, WACC is sufficient. Okay, so in terms of this spreadsheet, there's actually one more method called capital cash flow, but I'm not gonna go over that together with you. I'm gonna stop right here and I'll send you the spreadsheet so you can have a look at how I do the calculations. At least, the main point I want to make here is that these two are widely used, but they're widely used under different circumstances. Theoretically, all else equal, if you have two identical firms with identical strategies and financial strategies, you get exactly the same valuation. But because we want to have convenience, it is more convenient to structure your valuation model either in this way or this way, depending on your situation. So when you have normal corporate cases where capital structure is more predictable, where you have a target leverage, WACC is okay. But in cases where you have a lot of debt and debt use is not permanent, then using WACC can seriously misvalue the company you're looking at. And for that case, adjusted present value like this is a lot more accurate. Because when you have decreasing debt over time, then your tax shield would not be like this, where you actually have more and more debt over time. So this is the spreadsheet. The other spreadsheet I want to go over, which may be helpful for your case, is the other spreadsheet I sent you on M&A valuation. This M&A spreadsheet pretty much is the sheet that we saw earlier. We did together earlier. The structure is the same. So the top part here is pretty much the same as what you had before. But instead of doing the pro forma for the full balance sheet, you can do the pro forma for key elements. So you had a glimpse of this with your Ferrari case where you only needed information on NOPAT and invested capital. And then you're done. That's your main components of free cash flow. So you can do the same over here too. Maybe you want to have another line for EBITDA, but those are the key assumptions you want to have in valuing any company. So we have a case here where you have a company as is, but this sheet says value current. This is a valuation of the company you're looking at right now. The next sheet is value synergy. Looks almost identical, except for these two lines, or this one line and these assumptions. So the argument here is that if you acquire a company, these are your current operating assumptions, maybe these growth rate, these margins, and so on. But if you acquire a company and your margins change from 25% to 26% to 27% and so on, that's going to be impounded in this new valuation. So you can now compare the valuation of the two sheets. This would be, the first sheet would have been the target company as is. And the second sheet would be the target company with the synergy. So you can deduct one from the other and then value what that synergy is going to be. You can do valuation separately, but this is a convenient way of doing so. And then all you have to do is summarize, okay? Summarize the value of the firm. So let me show you a little bit about if you're doing an M&A deal, what are required of you. So you want to look at the company value as it is, and maybe compare this against the EV/EBITDA ratio to get some sense of what multiples this implies. And then you do another valuation of the company with synergy. So the difference between the two numbers, this one and this one, is going to be your synergy value, this box you're creating over here. The next step is then to identify what price am I going to pay. Remember what we did was valuation. That's the maximum price you're willing to pay. If it's more than this, it's a bad deal. So you determine what price are you willing to pay, then the difference between the two is going to be the NPV to the acquirer. But that's not all, because when you acquire, there's going to be some cost associated with acquiring. So typically when you do analysis, you should see net of the fees you're paying, am I making value or not? So here the valuation is 390. If I'm paying 400, my NPV is negative already. If I have to account for the fees I'm paying, it's even more negative. So we know we should pay maybe 360 for the company. Now this is already a very high premium compared to, somehow my functions are screwed. Okay, if you pay 360, this is gonna be implied, you're gonna get an implied price per share, and then you can compute at what premium are you paying. So you hear a lot about M&A premium. It's practically the price you pay compared to the price before you before you announce the acquisition. Okay, and then you can do the analysis of the sources and uses of fund. How are we going to finance this acquisition? So we're paying for the target. If the target has some debt, you're paying for the debt of the target, and then everything else that comes with it, and then add the fees. That's your uses of funds. You have to find then where you're gonna find the money. So in this case, even though we're paying 360, effectively we have to pay 370.8 because there's gonna be some fees associated with acquiring. So the price plus the fees is 370. Where you're gonna find the money? Part of it is gonna be from assuming the existing debt. So I'm paying 360 for the company, but 360 includes the existing debt. I don't need to pay for the debt, but I assume the debt instead. So here's the target debt assumed. And then you can determine how much cash you have to pay. And then the rest could be the acquisition debt, how much we need to borrow in extra to buy this company. So LBO analysis typically would then use this debt to see if you can afford to have this debt to acquire the company or not. So it goes in steps like this. But in terms of valuation model, this is pretty much the most basic representation of how you do an M&A valuation. Just this picture. Do the target itself, then value the synergy. You don't need to talk about acquiring at all, because remember, you add the two together, you get the whole company. But this is as it is. So you don't need to do this. It's not incremental to this deal. You could do it, but it's not going to add to any, insight at all. When you do an M&A, just look at a target alone this time. All right, so you have both of the sheets, both of the spreadsheets. I'll send you the completed version of this so you can take a look, at the steps behind it. For next time, we're gonna look at Sun Microsystems. It's gonna be an M&A case. So here are the questions to guide you through the process. Very basic questions, but most importantly, I want you to get a sense of how to do valuation of M&A. Especially a lot of you are proposing M&A.